Hello, hello. This is going to be lecture one on the digestive system. This is going to primarily cover anatomy and a little bit of physiology in the digestive process. And lecture two will cover mostly nutrition and metabolism and that kind of thing. All right, so here are your root words and prefixes and stuff to help you identify some of these science words in this chapter. This is not all of them, but this is some of the most helpful ones. So if you see that prefix gastro, that's going to mean stomach. Hepato is going to mean liver. Linguo is going to mean tongue, as in like linguistics. Nutri is going to mean nutrition. Peri means around. And vil usually means hair-like. So let's talk about the digestive system. So the function of the digestive system is going to be to obtain the energy and raw materials necessary for life through the process of digestion. Because the food that we take in, we have to kind of break it down to its constituent parts. Because we're bringing in really, really complex molecules. So we have to break that food into simpler substances that can then be used by cells for energy, growth, and maintenance in all of those metabolic processes and chemical reactions that take place in our body. So there's going to be six primary activities of digestion: ingestion, propulsion, mechanical digestion, chemical digestion, absorption, and defecation. And we will talk through all of those. The first is going to be ingestion. This is literally just eating. You have to eat stuff in order to begin this process of digestion, right? Propulsion is going to be the processes of swallowing and peristalsis. Peristalsis are smooth muscle contractions that move all the way throughout our digestive tract. Those muscles contract and it helps the food to kind of move through it. Next, we'll talk about mechanical digestion. So this is going to be the physical breakdown of food into smaller pieces. This is going to increase the surface area of food. The primary ways that we do this are through chewing, done by the teeth and the tongue, and also the churning that occurs in our stomach. We also have chemical digestion. In chemical digestion, enzymes and other chemicals produced by glands in the digestive tract help to break down food a little bit further. So this is going to be things like saliva, all of those digestive juices in our stomach, our liver and gallbladder and pancreas that secrete all of the digestive juices that we need. And then our small intestine also. All of these produce chemicals that help us break down this food in a chemical way. And absorption is when digested nutrients are moved from the intestines into the bloodstream. At this point, they can be delivered to cells throughout the body so that they can participate in those chemical reactions. This is going to occur primarily in the small intestine. And lastly is defecation. Defecation. So any undigestible material that is going to remain is going to be expelled from the body in the form of feces. So let's talk about some of the structures of the digestive system. When we're talking about the whole digestive system, you'll hear that referred to as the alimentary canal or the GI tract. This is going to be a hollow muscular tube that runs all the way from the mouth to the anus. It's going to include the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, the rectum, and the anus. Here are some characteristics of this canal. So it is going to have several different layers to the canal. First is going to be the mucosa, which is going to be the mucous membrane of the canal. It is going to protect tissues and allow for absorption of materials. We also have the submucosa. This is where you're going to find your blood vessels, your nerves, and your glands. We have a muscular layer. This is made of smooth muscle. This is what pushes the food forward in that process of peristalsis that we talked about before in the physical digestion. And then we have the serosa. The serosa is going to be a protective outer layer. So let's talk a little bit more about the mucosa because this is going to be where a lot of the action happens. This layer is going to be highly folded and it's going to contain tiny little projections called villi. These are going to be finger-like projections that are incredibly vascularized. So the increased folding and the villi both help to increase surface area of the digestive tract. This is going to allow for more absorption of nutrients into the bloodstream. So, how do materials move in the GI tract? We've talked a little bit about peristalsis, but let's talk about the two specific ways this happens. We get kind of like mixing movements that are going to contract back and forth to mix food together. This is known as segmentation. This kind of just looks like a process of kind of squeezing in and out and in and out and in and out. We also have propelling movements that contract in more of a rhythmic or wave-like motion, and this is known as peristalsis. So this actually squeezes the food all the way through the system, pushing it forward. Okay, so let's begin our journey through the alimentary canal or the GI tract. We're going to start in the mouth, also called the oral cavity. In the mouth, we have our tongue. This is going to serve to mix the food together and aid in swallowing. We also have several salivary glands. These produce saliva, which helps to moisten and lubricate the food, and also contain enzymes that start that chemical digestion process. We also have teeth in our mouth. These are going to be the hard enamel-coated structures that are going to aid in mechanical digestion to help break up that food and increase the surface area of food. A little fun fact is the enamel is the hardest substance that we have in the human body. Okay, so your book talks about several different digestive enzymes, but I just want to point out one of them too that is one of the most important ones, and that is amylase. So amylase is going to be the enzyme that is going to break down starch into simple sugars. And here we have the different glands that help to secrete the saliva and the amylase to help break it down. So the parotid gland is going to be this one, found a little bit up towards the ear. The submandibular gland is going to be found here under the mandible, and the sublingual gland is going to fall right here under the tongue. And these all help to secrete that saliva and those digestive enzymes. So let's talk a little bit about teeth. We're going to have a few different kinds of teeth. We're going to have incisors. These are going to be our front teeth. These are going to be chisel shaped. These are adapted for cutting food. We have canines. These are our little fang-like teeth on the sides. These are adapted for tearing or piercing food. And our bicuspids and molars are going to be the big, broad teeth in the back. These are adapted for crushing and grinding food. So all of our teeth have different purposes in that mechanical digestion process. The pharynx is commonly referred to as the throat. This is going to be a passageway that is shared by both food and air. And you should remember from the respiratory lectures last week that it is going to contain the epiglottis. The epiglottis, remember, is that little flap that flaps down to cover whenever food is passing through there so that we don't end up with food aspirated into our airway or something like that. It will push food into the esophagus instead of into the trachea. The esophagus is going to be a muscular tube that carries that bolus of food from the pharynx to the stomach by those involuntary contractions that we talked about called peristalsis. Let's talk about swallowing. So in step one of swallowing, the tongue is going to push that bolus back against the soft palate and back of the mouth. This is going to trigger the swallowing reflex. At that point, the upper esophageal sphincter is going to relax while the epiglottis is going to close to keep the swallowed material out of that trachea and airway. And then the food will move downward into the esophagus propelled by those peristaltic waves and also aided by gravity. Okay, let's talk about the stomach. Most people think about this whenever they are thinking about the digestive system. So this is going to be a hollow muscular organ, which is going to temporarily store food. It's going to churn and mix the food bolus into a semi-fluid paste called chyme. And it's going to have these deep gastric pits that are going to lead to gastric glands that are going to secrete gastric juice components. Here's some of your gastric juice components. So we're going to have intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is going to be required for absorption um, of vitamin. Oh, it cut it off there. It's going to be required for absorption of vitamin B12. Sorry about that. I will go back and add that in. The chief cells are going to make pepsinogen. This is the inactive form of the protein digesting enzyme pepsin. Parietal cells in the stomach are going to produce hydrochloric acid. Mucous neck cells are going to produce thin mucus to help protect the inner surface of the stomach. And enteroendocrine cells are going to make local hormones like gastrin that help to regulate the activities in the stomach. And your book talks a whole lot more about how it regulates these activities, and I highly suggest that you read that. So let's talk a little bit about the different structures and landmarks we will find in the stomach. So the stomach is all covered in rugae. This is going to be just folds in the wall of the stomach. This allows it to expand in size so that it can fill up with food. The cardiac or esophageal sphincter is going to prevent stomach contents from going back up the esophagus. When we're having a tough time getting this to work, this is whenever we have things like heartburn. And the pyloric sphincter is going to regulate the release of chyme into the small intestine. So let's talk a little bit about the small intestine. This is going to be the long organ after the stomach where most of the absorption of nutrients is going to happen. It's going to have three different sections. First is the duodenum. This is going to be where most of the chemical digestion occurs. This is going to be where secretions from our accessory organs, like the liver and pancreas, that we'll talk about later, help to digest nutrients and neutralize stomach acid. It's very important that stomach acid be neutralized at this step so that you don't have any issues in your colon. The jejunum is going to be the second section. This is going to be where the majority of absorption of nutrients occurs. This is where we're going to have our villi and our microvilli, which again are in there to increase surface area and help get those nutrients absorbed into the bloodstream. The third section is going to be the ileum. This is where the remaining nutrients and vitamins are absorbed, and this is where the small intestine connects to the large intestine. So let's talk about the large intestine. This is going to be a wide coiled tube right after the small intestine, which absorbs remaining water and nutrients, particularly vitamins. It's going to form feces, and it is going to contain intestinal bacteria that can help digest complex carbs and vitamins that aren't digested other places. Let's talk a little bit about a very special section. Um, It is the appendix. It's going to hang off the end right here. This is going to be a storehouse for good bacteria in the colon. It can become inflamed from infection, tumor, or injuries, and lead to appendicitis. After this, we get to the rectum and the anus. The rectum is going to be the final section of the large intestine. It stores feces right before defecation, and the anus is going to be the end of the GI tract where feces is eliminated. Okay, so we already talked about our salivary glands, our teeth, and our tongue. Let's talk about our other accessory digestive organs. And these are going to be organs which aid in digestion but are not part of the GI tract. So this is going to be like the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So the liver has so many functions. It's incredibly important. But for the sake of the digestive system and focusing on just digesting food, it produces bile to break down fats in the small intestine. It filters the blood coming from the digestive tract before it goes back to the rest of the body. It breaks down toxic substances in blood, like waste products from the body, and it stores glucose as glycogen. It also stores iron and vitamins A, D, and B12. So liver health is incredibly important. The gallbladder is going to be a small organ which stores bile from the liver. It releases it as needed into the duodenum of the small intestine. And bile is just going to be this dark green fluid that is used to emulsify and break down lipids. Remember, lipids are our fats. And we will talk more about lipids in the second part of this lecture. The pancreas is going to produce pancreatic juices. These are going to neutralize stomach acid as it enters the duodenum. This is incredibly important to stop from getting a hole in your colon because it is just not built to be able to handle the acidity of that stomach acid. The pancreas also aids in digestion of food, and it also helps to regulate your blood glucose. Okay, so now that we've understood all this piece by piece, I want to end the lecture by just talking about this whole process of digestion from start to finish. So, once food enters the mouth, the salivary glands are going to produce saliva that's going to contain the enzyme amylase. Amylase is going to begin the digestion of starch and carbohydrates, and the teeth and the tongue are going to begin mechanical digestion. After that, food is going to be pushed down the esophagus by swallowing. Peristalsis is going to help move this food down the esophagus as well. And the food is then going to be passed through the cardiac or esophageal sphincter of the esophagus into the stomach. Within the stomach, the digestive glands within the lining of the stomach are going to produce acid and the enzyme pepsin to break down proteins and kill bacteria. At that point, a thick layer of mucus is also going to be released to protect the stomach from the acid. We know the stomach is a muscular pouch. It's going to contract and release to kind of mix up the food like a washing machine at this point. And then once the food is properly mixed, the stomach is going to push the contents through the pyloric sphincter into the first part of the small intestine, which we call the duodenum. The liver, pancreas, and gallbladder are going to be attached to the duodenum through the pancreatic duct and the bile duct. And they're going to release additional digestive juices into the small intestine. These include bile to emulsify fats, amylase to further break down carbohydrates, and lipase to break down lipids. It also produces trypsin to help further break down proteins. As the contents travel through the small intestine, they're going to be absorbed through the small protections on the surface of the intestines called villi. And then each villi is going to be connected to a capillary so that these molecules can diffuse through the villi, and then they're going to be transferred directly into the bloodstream to be taken to the cells of the body. Eventually, any contents that are left and have not been absorbed by the small intestine are going to be pushed through the ileocecal valve and into the colon and large intestine. So as the contents move through the colon, water is going to be removed, and the leftover contents will become feces that are then going to be expelled through the rectum and anus during bowel movement. And that is our whole entire digestive process. It's really simplified from start to finish. That's all that I have on lecture 1. Stay tuned for lecture 2, where we will talk a little bit about nutrition.